we are going to have Kent C. Dodds give our next talk. I have this auto close thing on my Windows, and I had your bio up in front of me, and it's gone. So, okay, here we go. So Kent, he says he's a human. I don't know if I buy that. He has a wife and 2 kids, and one on the way. Actually, I think the one on the way just got here.
Yep, just last week.
Yeah, we were worried about that. He got efficient, and they got it done before the conference. He lives in Utah and works at Alianza Inc., where he builds a front-end application using AngularJS. He's the host of Angular Air, a live video broadcast all about Angular. He's the author and maintainer of Angular Formally. He's an egghead.io author with over 60 lessons about Angular, React, and JavaScript. He's also into open source and Twitter. I don't know what it means to be into Twitter, but we'll let him explain that. He likes speaking at meetups and conferences and giving hands-on workshops. He also enjoys chatting with people about front-end topics on Hangouts on Air. Overall, he just really, really likes JavaScript and the community behind it, so reach out to him. He loves to chat about code. Kent, go ahead and take it away.
Thanks, Chuck. So that Twitter thing, that was just kind of more about, if you follow me on Twitter, you're going to see a lot of tweets about coding and Angular and React and JavaScript and everything. So anyway, I'm excited to get started. So I'll just jump on sharing my screen, and yep, turtles all the way down. Okay. So hopefully you can see this. Let me know if you can't. This is my slides. So we're going to be talking about open sourcing your stuff. And this is a live coded demonstration of how you do that. So again, my name is Kent C. Dodds. Here's some information about me. And I do run Angular Air. I am an Egghead.io instructor. And so talking to the computer screen, even though it's kind of weird in like a conference scenario, I'm sort of used to it with Egghead, so hopefully this goes over pretty well. And then Angular Formally is where I learned a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about here with open sourcing your stuff. So yeah, so if you're familiar with my talk style, I always like to start with air squats. So everybody in your homes, wherever you are, please stand up and join me in air squats. Just kidding. No, I'm just joking. That would be kind of odd. But feel free to do air squats. I did a couple jumping jacks before this talk to ease my nerves a little bit. So yeah, you don't have to do air squats if you don't want to. So just I like to set expectations for my talks so that we aren't disappointed. And so this talk is not going to be an explanation of all the benefits of open sourcing. There are a lot of reasons why you open source, and there are plenty of blog posts and things that you can find online about why it's a good idea to open source. And hopefully when we go through this, you'll kind of see some examples of why it's good to open source. But yeah, that's not what this talk is going to focus on. It's also not a script for what you tell your boss when you want to open source something. That really depends on your culture. And so my company is really open to the idea of open sourcing things, and that's important to me, and it's really cool. If your company isn't quite there yet, then talk with your manager and see what you can do to become more friendly to open source. And then this is also, I'm not going to have time to talk about everything you need to know to maintain an open source project. I have an Egghead series that has just been we have 23 lessons, and there's more coming about how to write an open source JavaScript library. And so yeah, you can check that out. And hopefully that'll give you a little bit more information. So what this talk is, we're going to be identifying a good candidate in a project for open sourcing. So we've got a project, we're going to find a good candidate for open sourcing. And then we're going to extract that into a solid project. We'll set up a company on GitHub, an organization on GitHub for your company. And then we'll push the library to that org. We'll publish it to NPM, and then replace our own implementation in our project with the open source version of that component. So that is what we'll get through. This might be a little bit fast, and so hopefully we'll have this available later. So if I go a little bit too fast, you'll be able to catch up with the recording after the fact. But I'll try to make sure that I keep it fresh and interesting. And informative and entertaining. So this is the application that we're going to be using. If you aren't familiar with this, this is the To-Do MVC app. It's an application that was written to compare different implementations of JavaScript MVC frameworks. And so you've got Angular, you've got React, you have Vanilla.js, you have Dart even, like all kinds of different ways to build web applications. And they all implement the same application. And so we have the Angular version. I've made some slight modifications to it. And we're going to find a component in here to open source for our presentation. So the first step is to identify the component. So there are a couple of things you need to ask yourself when finding a good component for open sourcing. The first is it generic? So is it something that is not so specific to your use case that it couldn't be useful to anybody else? And then also, is it reusable in kind of the same idea in the way that it's implemented? And then also, does it have few closed source dependencies? So if you have something that has a lot of other dependencies within your project, then you're going to have to open source all of those other things before you can open source this component. And that's okay, and I've done that before, but it's just something to be aware of, that yeah, it makes it a little bit difficult to open source something that has dependencies that is closed source. And then finally, is it easy to draw a boundary between your library or what you want to open source and the rest of your application? If you have leaky abstractions going on all over the place, or you depend on some global state to be initialized, that might not be a very good component for open sourcing right away, and you might need to think about refactoring it first. So let's go ahead and jump into code. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. So here we have our app, and it's not like a huge huge application. We do have a router, but most of our stuff lives inside of our index.html. And so there are a couple of directives in here. There's a couple services, and we'll take a look at those pretty quickly. I'm making the assumption that you know Angular pretty well, so I'm not going to go like too deep into what all these things are. We'll just quickly go through some of the components of this app. So we have a single controller. It's To-Do controller. Controllers by themselves are not very good for open sourcing because they contain a lot of view logic, and so you'd have to open source the view or the template along with it. And so this To-Do controller probably wouldn't make a lot of sense to open source as a library. Services can be pretty useful for open source. Lots of times they go hand in hand with the directive. Sometimes they don't. So there's like authentication libraries and things. Those are terrific use cases for open sourcing. Our To-Do storage is just using local storage, and so that could be a good candidate for open sourcing, but that's not what we're going to look into. We're going to open source a directive. Directives are fantastic for open sourcing. And so we have two directives in our project, To-Do escape and To-Do focus. So I'll just demonstrate what each of those does here. So if we open up our index in a browser, we have hello Angular remote conf, but this is a to-do, so say hello to Angular remote conf. Hello. All right, done that one. And so we have this this capability of checking and unchecking a to-do. And if we double click, then we get into this scenario where we can edit. So we could say goodbye, but and then we hit enter, and that actually saves it. But I'm going to change this back to hello. But what actually one of the directives, the to-do escape directive, allows us to do is hit the escape key right here, and it will revert our changes and not actually persist those changes. And so that's actually the component that we're going to open source. Let's double check and look at the code to make sure that it follows our criteria. So we'll go to the to-do escape. We are using the app module here. We specify the directive name is to-do escape. And if we go look at where that's being used, to-do escape, all that we do is we basically say when the escape key is pressed, I want to revert the edits to this particular to-do, as we saw kind of in that quick demonstration. So how that is implemented is we bind to the keydown event on the element. And when that event is fired, we check that the key code is the escape key. And if it is, then we evaluate the expression that is passed into the attribute. And then on destroy, because we need to clean up after ourselves when binding events to elements, we're going to unbind the keydown event, and yeah, and then we're good to go. So we're going to open source this component. Okay, so we've identified our component for open sourcing. Let's go back to our slides here and check out the next thing. So now, before we actually open source this project, or as part of open sourcing the project, we need to create it. And so we are going to do that in a totally separate repository, and we'll initialize everything that we need. And this is a tweet from Viju, or Christopher Shadow. He works on React at Facebook, and he was just lamenting how much stuff you need for an open source project. Some of this is kind of joke stuff. This is actually from the Babel repository. But like, seriously, there are a lot of things that you need for an open source library. And we're not going to have all of these things. Not all of these things are totally necessary, but there are a few that are absolutely necessary. So let's go ahead and we'll create a new directory. So I'm going to jump up one directory, and I'm going to make a new directory called Angular to-do escape. And we'll change into that directory. And now I'm going to open up that in WebStorm. So we'll open Angular to-do escape. And there are a couple of things that we're going to want to have in here. The first off is a README. And the README file is what is going to be rendered on the homepage of our library. So if we go to github.com/formally.js/angular-formally, this is Angular formally, and we have this README, and that's just automatically rendered for us by GitHub. And so it's really common to have a README. It's a good idea to have one. And normally this is where you would list resources for learning your library and usage. And if your library is really small, this is a good place for documentation. If it's bigger, then having an extra website for docs is, can be useful. And so we're going to just simply say Angular to-do escape. And then here I'm just going to say, don't use this. It's fake. There are other tools that do this already. And that's actually another thing that I should mention is before you open source something, it's a good idea to go check and see if what you are doing yourself has actually already been open sourced, and maybe you can just like wipe out your own implementation and use that open source version. And so like this is one example where that is the case. There may not be like a specific escape, but there's likely something that could serve our purposes just fine. But our purposes right now is for me to demonstrate to you how to create an open source library. So that's why we're doing this. Okay, so README is very important. Another thing that's really important is contributing. Oops. MD. So MD is Markdown. And so the contributing.md is really important because when people want to file an issue or submit a pull request or something to your library, GitHub will direct them to this contributing MD. So if we go to Angular formally and we create a new issue, at the top here, we're going to see this, please review the guidelines for contributing to this repository. And so that links directly to our contributing MD. And if we don't have one, then GitHub won't link to it. And to be completely honest, not a ton of people actually look at that and actually click on it in my own experience, which is really too bad. But as people start using this more and realize that this is the proper way to do things, then it will help. And there are people out there who do know about this and will follow it. And it's also a good place for reference to say, hey, like you filed this issue, it's not part of our contributing guidelines or something, and you can point them to the contributing guidelines. So normally you'll want to have a couple of steps, like you'll say, hey, fork the repo and make your pull request, and here's how you do that, here's a link. But for us, we're just going to say contributing, don't do it, this is fake, smiley face, because smiley faces make all sentences happier. Okay, so README contributing. So far, we haven't done anything with Angular or even JavaScript yet. These are common for all types of open source libraries. Another thing that's less common but very important, I believe, is a code of conduct. So we'll create that MD file. A code of conduct just lays out how you expect people to behave when interacting with you as a contributor, as the author, and other people who are seeking help. You just want to make your library a place where people feel safe when contributing to your library via issues or responding to issues or creating pull requests. You just want people to be nice. And one that I really like, there are a couple codes of conduct, but one that I like is the contributor covenant. Angular has their own. You can write your own, but I really like the contributor covenant. So we're just going to copy this one, paste it in here. And one thing that we're going to add is something that's good to do is for people who notice a violation of the code of conduct, they need to know where they can go to report that violation so that it can be addressed. And so what I'm going to say is, if you notice a violation, please let support@angularremoteconf.com know. Yep, that's right, Chuck. Mail to. Okay, it's kind of funny to say what I think is kind of a joke and have myself laugh. Maybe we could have some audio, like sound bites of people laughing to make me feel better. Okay, so we're going to move on. And the last thing that you definitely need, regardless of language, platform, anything, is a license. So we'll create a license file here. And the reason the license is really important is because there are some companies that cannot use open source libraries without knowing their license, because there's some like real problems with that. So we're going to, I personally like the MIT license. So if you just search MIT license, you'll find opensource.org/licenses/MIT. And we're just going to copy this down here. And we'll go to the copyright line. We'll say it's 2015. Can't see Dodds. All right. So now that's everything that we need for our open source library. Now, and that's regardless of how we're versioning or how we're doing anything else. There's several other things that we're going to need for this library to actually work, and what we need for this to be a JavaScript library. And since we're hosting on Git, we're going to need a git ignore. So I'm going to actually copy this from somewhere else. So I'll copy from save, I thought ahead, the .git ignore. And I'm also going to copy, and the git ignore, if you're not familiar with Git, it basically just ignores certain files in your structure, so you don't actually commit those to GitHub, because there are some things that you don't want to commit to your source. And then we'll also have an npm ignore. And so if you're not familiar with npm, it's the Node Package Manager, or Nice People Matter, or whatever you want to say that npm stands for. But basically, npm ignore is similar to the git ignore, except when you publish your library, you can specify certain files that you don't want pushed up to the npm repository. And then also, we're going to bring in an editor config. If you're not familiar with editor config, this basically is a pretty common standard to configure editors. And so you have WebStorm will respond to this. Vim has a plugin. Sublime has a plugin. There are tons of plugins for all different editors. And what's nice about this is you can have your linting standards or your coding standards. But if the editor can adapt to the coding standards of your project, when people come to contribute, they don't have to think about making sure that they use 2 spaces instead of 4 or tabs. And so when you get contributions, they follow your standards a little bit better. And there's more that you can do to make sure that this happens with tools like JSHint or ESLint. But having the editor config is just a really valuable piece to your library. So we've got those 3 new files in here. Another thing that I would normally add, but I'm not going to right now, is an ESLint RC, and set up the ESLinting. That takes a little bit of time, and so I'm not going to do it right now, but you definitely want to have some sort of linting for your project so that when contributors come in, they can make sure that they follow your coding standards, so that you don't have to go back and forth a lot on pull requests. So we're going to just go ahead and skip that for now. And if you are interested, my Egghead series talks about that, or it will. So yeah, we have all of the basic files that we need for our project. I hope that wasn't too grueling. So let's move on to the next step, which is to create the GitHub org and the repo on github.com. So we'll go to github.com. And if you don't have an account already, sign up for an account. It's really a valuable thing to have. And so we'll go ahead and create a new organization. If your organization, if your company already has an org on GitHub, obviously just use that one. But if you don't, it's really simple to create one, and it's totally free. So we're going to say Angular to do MVC for our org name. And for our billing email, I'm going to say email plus Angular to do MVC. So here's a little pro tip for you if you didn't know. In the email specification, if you have a plus, anything between the plus and the @ sign is totally fair game. You can put anything that you want in there that's valid for like an email address. And then ultimately it gets sent to the email address as if it didn't have a plus. And where that's valuable is you can filter it on your side. So you can say, oh, anything that comes to here, I want to put in this folder or something. And then also, like if somebody sells your email address, you know that, hey, Facebook totally sold my email address or something. So anyway, there's a little pro tip for you, totally unrelated. So now we'll create this organization, and it's like totally instantaneous. We can add our coworkers here. I'm just going to go ahead and finish. And now we'll create our new repository right here. We'll call it Angular to do escape. And yeah, we'll just say don't use this fake smiley face. And we won't initialize this because we've already created all of our stuff. So we'll just go ahead and create the repository. And now we have our organization and our GitHub repo all set up. So let's move on to the next step, which is to create the Git repo and then add the remote URL. So if we go back in here, we'll go ahead and clear this. To initialize the repo locally, we'll say git init. And then we need to link our local repository that we just created with the remote repository. And thankfully, GitHub gives this to us right here. So we'll just copy that, paste it here, and now we've added the origin. So now we can commit these files. So we'll say git status, a bunch of files that we can commit. So we'll git add everything, and we'll look at our status again. Okay, so these things are staged. They're ready to be committed. So we can say git commit message initial commit with an emoji, because these are a lot more valuable than you really think. And then we'll push that. And so with our push, because it's our first push, we want to tell Git to track our upstream. And so we're going to add the -u, and then we'll say origin master. So origin being the remote that we're using, and master being the branch. So we push those up, and if we go back to our repo and refresh, now we see our initial commit with the sparklies. We see our README being rendered. If we go to create a new issue, we see the guidelines being linked to our contributing. So it looks like everything is all set up and ready for us to actually start committing code. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is copy the files that we need from our project to our new open source project. So let's go ahead and do that. We're just simply going to copy from to-do MVC Angular from the JS directives, and it's to-do escape.js. And actually, we're going to want to copy this to a directory called src for source. Put that there. And so we'll copy it to src and then to-do escape.js. And then we'll do the same thing for .test. And this is a testament to why it's valuable to keep all of your files in the same place. So you don't have a test directory and a source directory, or like a JavaScript directory and a CSS directory and a templates directory, where like things are mirrored. That like just doesn't scale or make sense, and it makes managing projects really difficult to do. And there's a lot of manual make sure that these file structures are the same. when you put things all just together, it's really easy to see and just look at, this is everything that I need for my project to actually work, for this component itself to work. And I take it a step further, and actually my translations, my I18N, all lives right at the same place that the component lives for it, which Webpack enables for me. Ask me about that if you're interested. It's pretty awesome. So now we have our to-do escape and our to-do escape test. And so here, editor config is telling me that it's going to be enforced in this file, which is nice. And here we have pretty much everything that we had before. So we're good. Let's go ahead and look at our status. We'll git add everything. And I'll commit this, adding files with the emoji of, I don't know, thumbs up. Okay, we'll push that. And let's move on to our next step, which is to alter the files so they can stand on their own. So there are obviously some things that are stuff depended on initially when we created the this directive in the first place. And one of those things was the fact that this module exists already. And we don't want to reuse the same module in our open source project, because then we'd have to tell people, hey, you need to create this module first. That really doesn't make a lot of sense. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a new module, and we'll give this a new name. And we'll just call it the same as our directive. It really doesn't matter all that much what you call that module, as long as it's relatively unique, and it's good to have it describe what it is that you get from this module. And so because we've changed the module that this directive is declared on, we also need to change the test. So before each, the module that is loaded is now the to-do escape module. And that's everything that we need to do to modify for these files to stand on their own. So yeah, we'll go ahead and commit that. Just all the things, modifying files. And I'm committing all these things one at a time so that you can go back and look at it later and see, okay, what did you do on that step? So hopefully this is useful to you. Okay, so we've altered the files. This is great. Now we're going to initialize our package. So npm init will create our package JSON for us, and the package JSON is used to describe the package, so that when you go and publish your library on npm, npm knows enough information about your package to distribute it to the masses. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'll create this, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So we're going to run npm init. And I've actually configured npm to have answers for some of these questions already, so it's not going to ask me all the questions that it might ask you. But if you want to know how to configure your npm to do that, my Egghead lesson teaches how to configure npm to like pre-fill the author and that kind of information. So here, the name of our library is Angular to-do escape. We'll go ahead and stick with the default there. The version is 1.0.0. I implore you to please not start your version at 0.0.1. It really makes no sense. Version numbers are version numbers. They don't get too emotional about your version numbers. Start at version 1.0.0 and just use semantic versioning, and you will be okay. So we'll start with 1.0.0. I'll remind everybody, don't use this, but it is a cool directive, smiley face. And our entry point. So the entry point is what is used when people in their code say, here actually, like if I wanted to depend on a module, I'd say require some cool module. And then whatever is returned from that will get inserted into this place. And so because we're not actually using common JS or AMD or any sort of module syntax, when they require our file, this is actually going to return undefined. And so that will not really be all that useful. And so I have a blog post that talks about how you can set up your library to export the module name so that people can do this kind of thing. Yeah, for us, we're going to go ahead and stick with the source to-do escape, even though this doesn't actually export anything technically. It's still the file that we want to have run so that this module gets created and our directive gets initialized. So we'll stick with source/to-do escape.js. And then our test command, we haven't set up tests yet, but we're going to, and so we'll just pre-fill this now. It's going to be karma start, and we'll do a single run. And then the Git repository is pre-filled, and so we'll go ahead and stick with that. The keywords is don't use me, I am fake. I'm serious, don't use this. And then our license is pre-filled because I've configured that to be MIT. And that looks good. So now we can jump in and check out our package.json. Pretty much looks like what I wanted it to. There's one thing that we need to add to this package.json because it's not totally 100% ready. So our library will not work at all without Angular. And so you could say that it has a dependency on Angular. And so we could add Angular to our dependencies, but the problem with that is that we don't want to enforce a specific dependency on the people who are using our library, because our library is more of a plugin for Angular. So rather than our library being the one responsible for bringing Angular into somebody's project, we're just going to live alongside or as a peer to Angular in somebody else's project. And so what we need is peer dependencies. And peer dependencies, you may have heard some bad things about peer dependencies. They're all lies, not all of them, but some of them are lies. Peer dependencies is actually a really good thing. And the changes in NPM version 3 is a pretty big improvement to how peer dependencies work. And version 3 has actually been officially released, so I recommend you go check it out. So here we're going to go ahead and say peer dependencies, and we'll add Angular. The thing with peer dependencies, and probably one of the reasons that people don't like them so much, is you need to make sure that the version range is as wide as possible. And so to verify that, you can go to semver.npmjs.com, right there. And in here, you can actually type in the name of a package, and then you can enter a range, and it'll highlight in green what that range actually does. So we could say caret 1.2.x, and so that gives us everything from 1.2 up. Unfortunately, it actually excludes betas, and oh my goodness, there's a 1.5.0 beta. I had no idea. Surprise! Things you learn at Angular Remote Conf. So yes, this excludes betas, and so if you want to include the beta, you're going to have to manually do this with 1.3.0-beta.0, or here we have rc.5. And so you have to manually include some of those. And so that is a little bit of a pain. And actually, technically with Semver, I believe that this is being implemented incorrectly, but you know, that's the world we live in. So yeah. And actually, we can say with a caret there, and that will catch all of those also. So anyway, that's something that I recommend that you do. Let's go ahead and capture that 1.5 beta as well. So it's your beta.0. And now we have everything. We don't have the build, but who's going to be using that? I hope you're not using that. Don't use that. Use the next version or something. But we'll go ahead and copy Angular as our peer dependencies with all these extra betas in here to make sure that people can use them even when they're using the beta. And now our package.json is totally set up, and we're ready to start distributing this library. So I'm going to go ahead and do a git status again, and we'll add everything. We'll commit everything to say adding or add package.json. And of course, cat with nice. Okay, great. So now we're going to initialize our project. So testing, everybody loves testing in public, but in secret, we're all not testing as much as we wish that we would. So I want to reiterate how important it is for testing. You're open sourcing this thing for various reasons, but one of those reasons is because you feel like what you have created could be useful to you in the future, could be useful to other people in the future. And if you want to have people use your project, then they need to be able to depend on your project. And so one of the things that you need to do is to set up your project's tests. And so we're going to do that with Karma. And luckily, we've already, like dutiful people, set up our tests for this And so all that we need to do is set up our test to actually run. So with Karma, the test runner developed by the Angular team, we need to install Karma globally. So if you don't already have it installed, you'll want to npm install -g Karma, or this is --global. So -g is a shortcut, and I is a shortcut for install. I'm not going to do that because internet problems, and I have already got it. So let's just leave it as it is. Once we have it installed, we're going to say karma init. And this will take us through a prompt to set up our Karma configuration. So our testing is, I just copied these tests from the original to-do MVC. Otherwise, I'd be using Mocha. That's just personal preference, but you can use several different testing frameworks. So we'll stick with Karma or with Jasmine. And we are not using require.js. And one thing that actually I recommend is you use Firefox for the browser that you're going to be running your tests in, because with Chrome, unless things have changed in the recent weeks, Chrome actually requires you to have the window open and like the window with focus. Otherwise, they have this optimization where they reduce memory allocation, and so your tests are going to take forever. It's really, really annoying. So stick with Firefox. It's great, and maybe someday we'll fix Chrome. And so now we need to say where our files are located. So, and we can use glob patterns. So we're going to say our files are in source /star.js. And that's everything that we're going to add right now. And then we're not going to exclude anything. We want Karma to watch the files and rerun tests on change. So there, our configuration was generated, and it looks awesome. And we're going to be revisiting this in the future. Yeah, looks like they don't like semicolons, but that's okay. So let's go ahead and run our test, and we're going to see that we have a problem here. So we'll run npm t or test or run test. All three of those are the exact same. So npm t is good. And start our tests, and we get a failure, and the reason is because Angular is not defined. So if you look in our package.json, we do have Angular as a pure dependency, but these things are not actually installed when you run npm install. These are just for warnings to people using our package. So we need to add some dev dependencies. So while we're developing the library, there are some things that we need to have. So we're going to say npm install -- save dev, or shortcut npm I -D, and this will be Angular and Angular mocks. Well, Angular mocks is what gives us the inject and module globals. And so, yeah, we need Angular mocks. And obviously, Angular is what gives us the Angular global that we need. So now in our Karma config, we're going to go back up to our files, and we need to have those files loaded before we load our source JavaScript files. So we'll say it's a node modules here. We'll just verify we have in our node modules Angular, and Angular mocks. So node modules /Angular/Angular.js, and we'll do the same for mocks. And if everything works, cross your fingers, this should pass all three of our tests. Hooray! I hope you're all clapping at home. Yay! So our tests are running. And we could set up code coverage, but we don't have time, unfortunately. I've got like 3 more minutes. So I would highly recommend that you check out my Egghead series. It's totally free, and I demonstrate how to set up test coverage. I actually don't use Karma, and I will in a future lesson show you how to set up coverage using Karma and Webpack for libraries. So keep an eye out on that. But we do show you how to set up test coverage for running tests with Mocha. So let's go ahead and commit this. So if we look at our git status, add everything. And now we'll commit with adding or add Karma. And let's do, I don't know, something super exciting. Yeah, smiling cat. They're fun. And we'll push. And now we can publish our library and push it up to GitHub. And so let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is, let's double check our version is the version that we want to publish. And then when you publish a version onto NPM, it's a good idea to tag the commit that you're publishing onto GitHub so people can see what the code base looked like at the time of a specific version. That's very valuable. And you can also set up a release on GitHub. So what we're going to do is we'll say git tag, and we'll call it v1.o.o, so matching the version there with the v. And then we're going to git push our tags. And this will add a new tag for us onto GitHub. And then we'll run npm publish. This is seriously happening, folks. This is super exciting. Okay, please work. Yes, totally worked. Okay, so now we have our package up on npm. Now if we run npm info angular to do, we'll get something that looks similar to our package JSON with a couple of differences. And one of those things is we have this versions here. And you'll notice there's a 000 temp. And that's because I didn't want any of you watching to steal the package before I actually got a chance to publish it. So yeah, take that. Okay, so now we can actually go to our original project and bring this in. One thing that I was going to show, but I'm not going to because I have 1 minute, is on GitHub, you can actually draft a release, and that can be useful as well. And something that's really valuable is to have a change log. And so you can do that there in the release draft, or you can have a change log here. Or if you're a boss, and I highly recommend you do this, check out my lesson on Egghead. And there, I show you how to use semantic release, which will do all of this stuff for you automatically. It's amazing. So I recommend you check that out. So let's go open our original to-do MVC Angular, and we'll change to that to-do MVC Angular. And now we're going to npm install as a save dependency. So we'll install -- save, or as a shortcut, npm I capital S. And this will be Angular to do escape. And then we'll get rid of our original to do escape here, and we'll add it right up here before we declare our module, because our module will depend on it. So we'll say node modules Angular to do escape. Whoops, I've got my practices in there still. There it is. We'll get rid of those two guys. How silly of me. Okay, so at least you know I practiced. There's our to do escape, and then we'll go to our source and to do escape.js. Okay, and then we'll go to our JS, we'll go to our app, and in here we've got the ng-route module. We'll add our to do escape module. And now if we go back to the app, open up our console here, ignore this failed file server thing. Everything seems to be working. We can make some changes, say hello, and I'll escape because it's time to say goodbye. And so everything is working just fine. And we've totally open sourced our library. We can get rid of these files. And now we don't need to worry about running those tests locally or anything else. It's totally in a separate repository, isolated. It's very easy to have a separation of concerns when your library is not even in the same repository. So that is setting that up. If we go back, we are totally done. So just in closing, I've got a couple of resources here in the slides, and yes, these slides will be available. So how to open source, write an open source JavaScript library. It shows you a lot more. How to distribute your AngularJS module is a blog post that I wrote that describes good practice for that. And then here's some other tips on forking a repo and how you contribute to other projects. So that's that. Thank you very much. And by the way, yeah, here's my slides. And I actually really, really appreciate feedback. So open sourcing your stuff, feedback, and open sourcing your stuff slides. Thank you. Hello. Maybe I'll go to... Whoops.
Do I need to unmute my pretty face?
Yes.
All right, here we go. All right. Do you need me to read you the questions, or do you have
Let
them
me jump on. It's I'm pulling up now. Let me pause this video because I don't want to watch myself. Okay, yeah. You can go ahead and read the questions just to moderate things.
Okay. So the first one is, what are the benefits of doing an organization versus creating the repo under a user account?
Good question. So there are not a whole lot of benefits. There are some, definitely. So some benefits are if your library has several associated libraries. For example, like Angular formally has several plugins and different things. And so having an organization for that library is totally useful. And then also, some companies want to have some like, I don't know, for their own clout or something, or goodwill. They want to have this open source that they're paying their employees to develop to be associated to the company. And so there's the value there. I have repos that are associated to my work. I have repos that are associated to myself, repos that are associated to other organizations that I've made myself. So yeah, it kind of depends on the use case. Good question.
All right. Next question. How are you getting emoji on your terminal?
That's an excellent question. So if you go to github.com/KentCDodds/.files, I'll post this as a comment, and look at my bash profile. I'll, let's see, right here. Let me paste that. So that is how that magic works. And if you want to know about bash profiles, you're going to want to ask Mike Hartington, because he's the boss at bash. This was totally hacked together. But yeah, I think emoji makes life more fun. And so that's why I do that.
All right. We'll ask Mike about it on Saturday.
Sweet.
All right. Next question. Why have the test under source or SRC instead of having a test folder at the root? Most people like me, one of the first things I look for is the test folder.
Yeah, that's a good point, Carlos. I think that people probably do look at a project and think, oh, there aren't any tests for this thing. And so that's why it's important to have a badge on your repo. Either way, like even if you do have a test folder, that indicates the coverage. But not to say that coverage is the solution to all bugs, because it's certainly not. But yeah, the reason that I like to have my tests and my components right next to each other, I kind of described this in like a bigger project, but it's just really useful to say, like if you go to make an update to a file and you're changing it, and then you look over, oh yeah, there's a test file right there, I should probably update that too. So there's that piece of it. And then it's also just really nice to have things componentized and have them all put together. So in a small library like what we just created, it probably, obviously it's a really small library, you don't have a very big folder structure to keep in sync or anything. So it's kind of sixes. Yeah, so it's kind of a personal style that I like to just keep all of my stuff side by side, same name, just a different extension. And yeah, so that's just a personal style thing. But yeah, definitely have a badge. I recommend you have a badge on your repo. And I actually talk about that in my Egghead series.
Awesome. Next question. There's a lot of work before we committed code, 25 minutes. Are there shortcuts, a repo to fork, or a script to run?
Yeah, good question. I'm actually working on something right now, or I will be soon, that will kind of generate some stuff for you. You'll just answer a prompt and it'll generate your license and all of these extra features or files that you need to have. That's really hard to do. One of the things, you have Yeoman generators, and I actually really don't like Yeoman just because it enforces a lot of opinions on you that they're out of context. They don't know what my personal opinions are. But there, if there's a way that we can make it not so opinionated, but still fulfill the things that we want to in the general case, every project's going to need a README. Every project's going to need to have a license, and code of conduct is really good to have. And so if there's a way that we can have have the best of both worlds, then that's good, and that's something that I want to work on. And then the setting up the repo part is a lot less work. I know that it doesn't really seem like it, but it is a lot less work than the maintaining the library in the long run. And so we already have some really awesome tools to help with that. with continuous integration with Travis or Snap CI or CodeShip or something, and semantic release, which I like. Seriously, check that out. It's amazing. So yeah, there's a lot of extra stuff. And that's, I think, one of the reasons why people don't open source, because they are afraid of it. But like in less than an hour, we had something totally open sourced. And so like it's totally something that's possible to do. And I recommend that you do it because it's valuable to the community and it's valuable to your company.
All right. Next question. What are your thoughts on putting a V or not in the tag or release version?
Yeah, good question. I used to be like pretty solid on not adding a V. But then I can't remember exactly what it was that convinced me that I should. But with every tool that I'm aware of that looks for like tagged releases, it actually doesn't really, like, they check for both V and not a V. So I think maybe having a V just kind of denotes, hey, this is a version. So I don't think that it really makes a difference. I started using V, I think, because Semantic Release uses V, and it like creates my tags for me automatically. And so I just to be consistent with the way that Semantic Release does it, to have some sort of consistency, I use a V now.
All right. Your README is using Markdown. Any tips for making it both GitHub friendly and text editor friendly?
So my recommendation is to get a text editor that likes Markdown. Markdown is, I personally wish that every input all over the web supported Markdown. It is an amazingly easy way to compose content. And so, yeah, I really like, I like Markdown. WebStorm supports Markdown pretty well. Atom has great support for Markdown. Vim has plugins. So yeah, I think, yeah, just embrace Markdown, I guess. I believe that you can actually just make it a TXT file and it'll just like render. It doesn't look very pretty, but yeah, just use Markdown. Embrace what everybody else is embracing, I guess. Drink the Kool-Aid.
All right, last question. Why don't you recommend starting with version 0.0.1?
Yeah, okay, good question. So semantic versioning actually allows breaking changes for anything that's sub 1.0 at any point in time. So you can have a breaking change in a patch release. So if you're not familiar with semantic versioning, you have 3 numbers. The first number is the major version, and that's the version that you bump anytime you have a breaking change. The second number is the minor version, and that's the version that you bump anytime you have a new feature. And the last number is a patch version. That's the version you bump anytime you have a bug fix. And technically, bug fixes might be considered breaking changes because, like, maybe somebody depended on that bug. And in that case, just bump the major version. We get way too emotional about our versions. But the reason that I don't like starting at 0.0.1 is because, like, you cannot communicate this breaking version concept with that. And so it's just a really good idea to just simply start with 1.0.0 and then communicate your breaking or your adding or your fixing through the version number. So like it's okay if your versions get up to like 40 or 50 or 1 million. Like, I don't care because I'm not really looking at it all that much. I'm more interested in my computer understanding what those versions mean. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Kent. I can just imagine the wild applause echoing across the internet.
Yay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for this opportunity. And I appreciate the questions.
All right. Well, we are going to break for about a half hour, which is where I'm at. That's 2:30 Eastern time, New York time. And I'm not even going to try and figure out what that is, GMT. But yeah, so come back in a half hour, go get some food, and we'll see you then.